Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I'm Deepak. I'm a data scientist at Battelle Memorial Institute. I work as a contractor at the National Energy Technology Lab in Morgantown, West Virginia. My talk today will be about MFIX-Exa. So MFIX-Exa is a computational fluid dynamics discrete element model code, which we've been developing in the last few years. And this talk will specifically focus on how MFIX-Exa leverages AMReX's embedded boundary framework to achieve its goals of being able to model chemical reactors with complex geometries. So before I get started, this is just a disclaimer for the presentation. So yeah, I'm part of the MFIX-Exa development team, the other members being Roberto, Will, and Jordan. Jordan Musser is the PI of this project. I'd like to start off with a quick overview of MFIX-Exa. So it's a massively parallel high-performance multi-phase code which runs on both CPU and GPU supercomputers. The targeted physics here is reacting fluid solid flows inside chemical reactors, which could have complex geometries, which will be the focus of this talk. As I mentioned before, it's a CFD DEM code, but also has support for low fidelity particle in cell solids model. It was developed as part of the ECP project, and it's built off of AMReX's library, so it's an AMReX application. So MFIX-Exa has been demonstrated on at least 512 GPUs on the LCF systems, on all of the LCF systems, and has been scaled to 60,000 GPUs on OLCF's Frontier. It is available publicly for download through our website. So to start off, I'd like to take the example of a sample reactor geometry. Here we can look at a chemical looping reactor. So this uses a looping mechanism whereby the fuel is burnt in the fuel reactor using metal oxides. Then the spent metal oxide travels through the L valve into the air reactor where it gets replenished and goes back up the riser and down through the loop seal and through the standpipe goes back to the fuel reactor where it oxidizes further fuel. So as you can see, the geometry consists of many primitive shapes that have been combined together. You will also notice that between the fuel reactor and air reactor, there's a big gap or a dead space where there's really no fluid or solids. And the other observation is how we have all these jets being injected at different sections of the geometry. So while the exact near boundary fluid profiles are not of importance to us, we want to capture the overall geometry, especially with how the fluids and solids react with each other. So having an idea of the kind of geometry we're targeting, if we look at the support provided by AMReX, AMReX provides a distributed embedded boundary database class which stores all the cut cell information such as the cell centroids, area fractions, etc. And this is stored in its own grid across the multiple processes. The information that is used to build this database class comes from a user-provided implicit function. So the implicit function is simply a function which, when provided a point in space, the coordinates of the point in space returns a value. And if the value is less than 0, the point is inside the fluid. And if it's greater than 0, it's outside. So AMReX does provide C++ implicit functions. But to use those, then the user has to construct the geometry using C++ code and compile them each time it changes, which isn't very convenient. And also, there isn't an easy way to visualize the geometry as the user constructs them. So to address this, MFIX-Exa leverages a more user-friendly way of specifying or generating the implicit function. So MFIX-Exa leverages OpenSCAD, which is a free software for creating 3D objects. OpenSCAD is not an interactive modeler, but focuses on CAD aspects, which aligns more with the kind of geometries we are targeting, because the reactors are all designed based on CAD aspects. So OpenSCAD can render the SCAD files into other file formats like CSG, STL, OFF, and some of the other advantages of OpenSCAD is that it's easy to change any step of the geometry construction. You can overlay something like a mesh on top of your geometry to see how it's going to be resolved in the simulation. And it also has extensive like documentation and support. So specifically, MFIX-Exa uses the CSG file format, which is lightweight and text-based. Since it has fewer elements to parse, it's easier to parse. So here's an example of how a CSG geometry file would look like. So to just summarize a user's workflow to specify a geometry, it starts off with creating the 3D object, visualizing it, and exporting it to CSG file using OpenSCAD. And then the user, they specify the path to this file in the inputs deck of MFIX-Exa. MFIX-Exa then parses this file, converts it into an AMReX implicit function, builds the geometry using AMReX, and then the solver uses the built geometry to run. So having defined the geometry, we now look at how we can potentially save simulation costs by getting rid of unwanted grids. So as I mentioned before, there are a lot of spaces between the inside the reactor where there's neither solids or fluids. So this is these grids are fully eliminated when creating the base grids. This reduces the memory required and also enables us to run larger systems with the same number of nodes. And as you can notice, the savings are also depend on how small the grid sizes. So the pruning savings become more as the grid resolution is smaller and the fitting around the geometry gets tighter. So the other aspect that we want to capture are of these flows through different sections of the geometry that I talked about. So we refer to this as flow through embedded boundaries. And the way we can achieve this is through AMReX's support, in particular in 4 places. So the MAC projector allows setting of an EB inflow velocity, which goes into the divergence source. Then the diffusion solver accepts an EB velocity, which then it sets on the instead of the no-slip walls, it uses the EB velocity when doing the diffusion solution. And the nodal projector also needs to account for the divergence coming from the EB velocity. So this one is a little more involved, as we need to pre-compute surface integrals, and this is done only when EB flow is enabled and uses algorithm to achieve that. And finally, when extrapolating velocity to faces, we also need to account for EB velocity. So here's just a illustration of a demo of how it works. So if in this case there is a EB plane defined at a certain distance from the left domain boundary, and it's imposed a velocity of 0.1 meters per second. So we can see that the fluid profile picks up this inflow and is able to create a uniform velocity of 0.1 meters per second, which is as expected. So here I want to also mention that in general, it's a good practice to place the EB on which we're going to impose velocity just inside rather than just outside. So this way we avoid imposing small cell handling on EB cells with inflow. And I'll talk a little more about the small cell handling in the last few slides. So the inputs that go into creating this flow through EB pretty much is a box inside which we have the EB surface on which we want to impose the flow. So in this example, I want to have flow coming from the bottom along the blue arrows. So I define a box which contains it. Then I specify a fluid velocity either as a velocity by itself or a volumetric flow rate. So in case of two-phase simulations, I also have an option of specifying a solids volume fraction. And in that case, I get particle-laden jets coming in from the bottom. So as you can see, I don't want flow coming from like the sides. So I also specify a normal and a tolerance. So that just makes the code not impose any inflow on cells which don't have the same normal that I've specified. So now having at this point, we have talked about how to specify the geometry, how to prune out unwanted grids, and how to impose flow through embedded boundaries to get those inflow at different geometry sections. But this may not be sufficient to get the simulation running. We still need to handle small cells. So in the next three slides, I will talk about the ways that we handle small cells. First, we want to cover the really small cells. And the covering of small cells is actually a iterative procedure. So as you can see, we start off by covering the bottom left one, but that just makes because it falls below a threshold, but that just makes the cell above it also fall below the threshold. And the same thing happens to the cell above that cell in iteration through 2. And finally, after the end of iteration 3, we no longer have these cells which fall below a volume fraction threshold. So AMReX provides support for this iterative process by setting a EB2.small volume fraction. And one thing is, as the mesh gets finer and the threshold gets higher, especially for more complex geometries, the number of iterations can get very large. So one way to help with the startup costs is to use EB restart files, which is also supported in AMReX. So that way we can just regenerate the geometry from the files that we've written out to. The other aspect of handling small cells is even after covering the very small ones, the ones that remain control the CFL number, and so we need stability. We need to make sure that the algorithm is still stable. So for this, MFIX-Exa employs the weighted state redistribution algorithm that AMReX provides. This algorithm we found is a lot more robust and has shown to be more stable than the flux redistribution algorithm for many of our complex geometry cases. The state redistribution algorithm stabilizes the cells by merging them within a neighborhood and has a default target volume fraction of 0.5. So just as a side note, because of the robustness and general applicability or adaptability of the SRD algorithm, we have also optionally included them the same algorithm to redistribute solids volume fraction, and that option is also there for the user. So the final aspect of handling small cells is the choice of the bottom solver. So AMReX again offers a external solver called Hyper, and for the MLMG algorithm. And we have found success in using Hyper as the bottom solver in many other complex geometry cases where the native big stab fails. And due to the robustness, this has now Hyper has now become the de facto solver with GMRS and Boomer AMG as the preconditioner. And a word of caution, though, is that the exact Hyper settings have been found to be very sensitive to the specific problem and hardware. So it's still a little bit of trial and error to make sure we get a optimal performance with Hyper. So this just shows the successes we've had with different complex geometry runs. So the top left is a distributor plate with lots of nozzles. This CF circulating fluidized bed reactor is on the top right. The bottom left shows the CLR that I've talked about. And the bottom right is a biogenic fluid catalytic cracking reactor. So as you can see, they all have like lots of geometry details, both internally and externally, and we've had success running on them. So just as final word, I wanted to mention that one of the future work would be to have moving embedded boundaries. So one approach would be to leverage the flow-through EB framework and a novel moving state redistribution algorithm. And this is just a prototype on InkFlow. But the way it would work is the cuts are regenerated at every time step, and it would still be conservative and constancy preserving. And so this would allow MFIX-Exa to expand to more geometries, especially I mean, in particular, the ones that have movement in them, such as mixing tanks. So with that, I just want to acknowledge the funding, and then I'm happy to answer any questions or. If you have any.
You're going to be changing over speakers as well.
Yes.
How does the hyper settings depend on the hardware?
Yeah, I think the GPU versus CPU. There's some, yeah, so it's just GPU versus CPU though. I think it's more of performance. To get much faster performance, there are some parameters which are much faster on GPU. I'm not entirely sure why that implementation is such, but yeah.
The only solver, right? Not before it was as the bottom solver, and now it's.
It's still the bottom solver.
Oh, are you saying so? Are you using Hyper with MLMG or Hyper
Yes.
itself?
Hyper with MLMG. Yes, correct.
Is there one more?
Oh, yeah. So I guess I don't really know much about PB, but so I guess I didn't understand why you need to like iterate the geometry to reduce the number of small cells if you're gluing them together in a later step.
Yeah. So the reason is that the way the geometry generation works in AMReX is as soon as you touch one cell, because we allow only single cuts, the other cells are also affected. So as you touch more cells, the neighbors start getting affected, and they may fall below a small threshold. This happens like when you have like lots of curvature.
Right. So why does this? But you're gluing them together.
We're not gonna. I don't think we're gluing them together.
If you pop this one to be like that, this one then it stays connected at the base. So therefore, if you change this cell to move it here, then the place that the cut intersects that base moves, which changes this cell.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so you do these, and then they affect these,
Yeah.
and eventually get away from the geometry.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the question is more if there is the SRD correction, the small cell fix.
Oh, then why do you do that at all?
Yeah.
That was what I.
Okay.
Oh, I think this is a filter. Like the very small cells, we just don't want the fluid solver to see. It I think that makes the fluid solver stiff in a different way than what SRD addresses.
So in theory, SRD takes care of it all, but the reality is like 10 to the minus 7 cells is kind of not what's computed. So there's there's kind of a sweet spot in there that SRD is good, but you might as well get rid of the really small ones. Just for
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah.
Because SRD has a certain diffusive quantity.
For us, we see problems in the condition number of the matrices too.
Yes, and the solver.
Yeah.
So then, if you have a problem with the solvers, you have very small cells that just mess with the condition matrix of your solvers.
Yeah. So like you need all kind of what we found is all the three, like having a hyper bottom solver, covering small cells, and SRD all help together. Yeah.
Purely explicit hyperbolic, then SRD
Thank you.